If you ever saw a high jumper, they might be running for their approach and then they don't jump. They have to run back because their approach wasn't quite right. My name is Paul Pasolka, Ivy Masters Learning Center and IvyMasters.com, and today we're going to look at Test 3, Section 1's number 29 and 30, and the approach is everything. So let's say you read 29, notice it's paired with number 30. If you just remember the answer, then answer 29. If you don't remember the answer but you remember the lines, then answer 30 first. But if neither of those things, what's a good general approach? Good general approach is go to the lines first and eliminate anything that's not answering the question. That's going to force you to understand the question. It's also going to force you to understand the lines, and hopefully you could eliminate a couple of answer choices based on that. Now, a drawback of that approach is that sometimes more than one of these line references work, in which case the correct answer has got to be the one that matches. And likewise, for number 29 type question, more than one answer choice might seem to work. Well, the correct answer's got to have a match with number 30. And here's the kicker. Let's say you read the question and you're like, yeah, I don't even know what it's asking. If you could pick out a match, one that matches between 29 and 30, you could just about forget about the question and still get that question right. Now, the kicker is that sometimes there's more than one match. If there's more than one match, then it's going to be the answer that directly answers the question. So, bottom line is, it's got to directly answer the question, and it's got to have a match with the following question. So, 29 reads, what can most reasonably be inferred about gliding animals from the passage? So, I've already got the line references marked out. Let's go up to the line references. Answer choice A, they, who's they? We'll read before. At field sites around the world, Ken Dial saw a pattern in how pheasants, quail, tinnitus, and other ground birds ran behind along their parents. They jumped up like popcorn, he said, describing how they would flap their half-formed wings and take short hops into the air. It doesn't say anything about them being gliding or flapping. So we're going to move on to the next line reference. Answer choice B, they, who are they? And so again, if we read a little before, now notice we get that oftentimes, we'll get a pronoun and we got to figure out what the pronoun's referring to. Now at this point you would have already read the passage, so you might have, you might know what they are talking about. But at first it seemed unnatural. Ground birds don't like the ground. So he's talking about ground birds. More specifically, Ken settled on the chukar partridge. So the chukar partridge is the bird that he's studying. The chukar partridge, they really only used the ground for breeding and traveling. In the context of this paragraph, that's the scientist, Ken Dial, has them on the ground, and the rancher's like kind of cursing at him, saying, hey, they don't like the ground, give them something to perch on. And so then he was like, oh yeah, they need something to perch on. They don't like the ground because they're afraid of predators. They're afraid they're going to be eaten. So anyway, that's him like processing what the rancher said, saying, oh yeah, they only like the ground for breeding and traveling. Answer choice C. The birds were doing the very same thing with their wings to help them scramble up otherwise impossible slopes. What is the very same thing? Once again, it's at the end of the paragraph, so that suggests you should read before. But also, if we read before, it's saying that as they're flapping, as they're running up ramps, and even they could run up a vertical wall, as they're doing that, they're flapping their wings and using it like a spoiler in Formula 1 racing that helps the tires stick to the ground when you go really fast. So they're flapping their wings so that their claws will stick to the surface if it's a really steep incline or even if it's vertical. So the birds were doing the very same thing with their wings to help them scramble up otherwise impossible slopes. Again, answer choice A, B, C. We don't see anything about gliding birds per se. In fact, answer choice C, obviously they're flapping. Answer choice D, it starts, the whole thing is a parenthetical phrase. When I say that, what do I mean? I mean the phrase inside parentheses. Sometimes the SAT will use that phrase, parenthetical phrase. If you read the beginning of the paragraph, in an evolutionary context where take surprising explanatory powers. And what's where it tells you up here somewhere it's wing-assisted incline running. And that's the little theory that Ken Dial made up. In the evolutionary context, where it takes on surprising explanatory powers, with one fell swoop, the Dials came up with a viable origin for the flapping stroke of birds, something gliding animals don't do. So gliding animals don't flap, and thus a shortcoming of the tree down theory. So it sounds like what he's saying. There's a debate about the ground up tree down theory, and that's basically what he's focused on in his studies here. So anyway, it looks like it's going to be answer choice D, because that is the only answer choice that's addressing gliding versus flapping birds. So now let's see what answer choice D matches. Answer choice A, their young tend to hop along besides their parents instead of flying besides them. So here's an example with A here and A here of a match that doesn't answer the question, because there's no mention of gliding animals. And if you remember lines 4 to 6, they jumped up like popcorn describing how they flap their half-formed wings, take short hops into the air. That's just because the birds don't know how to fly yet. It's not like they're young and they just prefer to walk besides their parents rather than fly besides their parents. And plus, it's not answering the question because we're talking about gliding animals. So that's an example of a match that doesn't answer the question. Answer is B. Their method of locomotion is similar to that of ground birds. Well, it's the last paragraph is just talking about flapping birds versus gliding birds and how they are different. It's not categorizing ground birds per se in that paragraph as flapping or gliding. Answer choice C, they use the ground for feeding more often than for perching. Well, by the definition of perch, you're not on the ground. And that's probably matching with 28 to 29, but again, not answering the question. So B and C are probably a match. Let's just read 28 to 29 again. They really only use the ground for feeding and traveling. And that matches answer choice C, kind of, sort of. But again, it's not the correct answer because it's not talking specifically about gliding animals. So answer choice D, they, meaning gliding animals, do not use a flapping stroke to aid in climbing slopes, based on 72 to 74. Let's revisit it. So with one fell swoop, the Dials came up with a viable origin for the flapping flight stroke of birds. So the birds were flapping as they were going up the inclines in the experiment. Something gliding animals don't do. So what don't they do? They don't flap. So it sounds like if they didn't flap going up the inclines, then they don't use a flapping stroke to aid in climbing slopes. That literally, those ramps were slopes. So the correct answer here is D for 29 and D for 30. Thank you for joining us today. If you like this video, click like. You can share it with someone who has trouble with these paired questions. If there's any question you'd like to see answered from any official PSAT or SAT or ACT, leave that in the comments. I'd be happy to shoot a video on it. And click subscribe so you don't miss anything. Have a great day.